Today we are answering the question, do you lose your individuality after death? Are you still you? What happens after death? Today we're exploring all those questions and more as we explore the death current and in context of life after death and do you retain your individuality. We're also going to be continuing to explore the declassified CIA document, the gateway process. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. You don't need to know to understand what we're talking about. This is important information about life after death and you as a unique being. This relates to what you are, where you are, and why you are here. Important need to know information. Here we go. Let's begin. Right before we do, I just want to remind you, please hit like and subscribe. And if you enjoy my work, support over on Patreon. It helps out a lot and you'll get access to all our members only videos. We have a lot of them and new member only videos every single week. That's a lot. So anyone who supports on Patreon or tier 2 or higher on YouTube gets access to all of that. Also, look out for scams. There's a lot of scammers in the comments pretending to be me, telling people to join my WhatsApp or Telegram. I don't have a WhatsApp. I don't have a Telegram. That's a scam. Don't fall for it. And finally, there are a lot of groups and people out there spreading disinformation and misinformation about me and what we do here because they don't want this information to get out. So be smart. Don't fall for the bullshit. All right, let us begin. So, life after death. Do you retain your individuality or do you not? In Hinduism, there's the idea of the Atman, which means the self, which is an eternal, enduring self. And then in Buddhism, they have the Anatman, the no self, meaning there is no enduring self. So what happens? Do you retain your individuality? Are you absorbed into a cosmic oneness? So is there nothing at all? How do we know? How can we know this? That's exactly what we're taking a look at today. Now, what we're going to be doing is continuing to read from this declassified CIA document, the gateway process. And again, if you haven't seen my other videos on it, don't worry, you don't need to have seen them to be able to understand this, but I highly recommend checking them out if you enjoy what we're talking about now. It will add context to it. So before we can understand, and this is the thing that I always try and emphasize to people. People always ask big questions like what happens when we die? Or what is God? Does God exist? What is my purpose? All these big questions cannot be answered until you know what you are, where you are, and why you're here, or what existence is in the first place. How can you know if God exists if you don't know what God means? How can you know what happens after death if you don't know what death is? How can you know all these questions if you don't know what existence itself is? So we have to have sort of a foundation first. So I want to continue to read from this CIA document. And at first it might seem like, well, what does this have to do with life after death? And I'll explain why, and you'll see why. So just bear with me. If it seems like I don't really know where this is going, just bear with me and you'll see how it unfolds in understanding what happens when we die. And most importantly, with regard to if you have an enduring self, if your individuality is retained after death. So let's start talking about this right now. We noted earlier that the out-of-body state involves projection. Okay, so why does out-of-body state matter? Out-of-body state matters because it's similar to death in that one is detaching in a way, one's consciousness is detaching and becoming disassociated from the body. Now, death is a much more extreme version than simply an out-of-body experience because you're still associated with your body. Even though your consciousness is being projected away and outwards from your body, you still have an association with it. Death is when that association is gone. It's broken. But we can get a glimpse or a preview of death in things like out-of-body experiences or dreaming or even psychedelic experiences. Once again, don't do anything dangerous or illegal. Now remember, they're not exactly like these experiences because you're still associated with your body to some degree. But it can give hints or previews to it, at least empirically speaking, with these experiences that one has. So we noted earlier that the out-of-body state involves projection of a major portion of the energy pattern that represents human consciousness so that it may further move freely throughout the terrestrial sphere for purpose of information acquisition or into other dimensions outside of time-space, perhaps to interact with other forms of consciousness within the universe. So in other words, simple terms, what is out-of-body state? Well, it's a projection of a portion, some of human consciousness into some area on Earth, or even into different dimensions outside of space-time. So, consciousness is the organizing and sustaining principle. And why are we talking about consciousness? Why is consciousness important? Well, if we want to know about our individuality after death, we have to talk about consciousness, because consciousness is associated with our subjectivity and our subjective experience and our individuality. We are individual experiencing minds, and we develop consciousness, we develop self-awareness throughout our time in an avatar and having experiences. But our individuality is rooted in having an individual subjective conscious experience. Now, the word consciousness is fraught with difficulty because so many people use it in different ways. I'm not going to get into that today because that'll be too confusing. So just try to understand it within context, okay? Let's see, where was I? Consciousness is the organizing and sustaining principle that provides the impetus and guidance to bring and keep energy in motion within a given set of parameters so that a specific reality will result. When consciousness reaches a state of sophistication in which it can perceive itself, its own hologram, it reaches the point of self-cognition. Okay, so in our terms, the way we view reality, what's this talking about? Well, it's saying that basically we are minds. We are subjective, experiencing, sentient minds. And so what do we know minds to be? We're systems of energy, systems of frequency. So we are not our physical bodies. We are eternal minds. We're systems of frequency. We are systems of energy. Now, we can know this to be true via reason and via mathematics. We can understand that we are systems of energy via that this energy has to exist and must exist because the laws of how reality works demands that it be so. A simplistic way of understanding this is that we are mathematical beings, and because mathematical beings contain every value within themselves, this value results in zero. So in other words, the defining number, the number that defines us, is zero. There's also, if we want to be more specific, we could say that what defines us is 0, 1, and infinity. These three concepts define us as eternal minds. Why is that the case? Because we contain every value within ourselves. It all balances to zero. We are a single mind, that is a single zero. So that's where one comes from. We are a one that is a zero, and infinite in that we contain everything within us. So we are one mind that contains infinite everything within ourselves that balances to zero. So we are one, infinite, zero. We are a one, infinite, zero. Being that we are a one, infinite, zero, we have to exist and we must exist eternally. Because logically, zero is nothingness, and nothingness is a concept that cannot be created or destroyed. Nothing just is, its existence is mandatory. So we are one infinite nothingness that is eternal, that has to exist, and that must exist. So this is what we are. We aren't our bodies. Bodies are finite, contingent things that are structures of waveforms that eventually collapse and join up with nature, which means it becomes a part of a larger waveform, a larger wave structure. This particular perturbation of the cosmic wave function ceases to be. So what we truly are is an eternal mind, which is a one, infinite, zero that must exist. All right. So that's the easiest way to understand what we are. Okay. So that's in a nutshell what we are. So being that we are this mind, okay, a one infinite zero that is composed of frequency patterns. And the reason why we're composed of frequency patterns is because frequencies are a mathematical concept. So since we contain mathematical concepts within ourselves, this manifests as frequency. Frequency is a purely mathematical concept. So we're beings of frequency, we're beings of mathematics, we're beings of thought that's able to have experiences. And eventually, we are exploring our various patterns. We are exploring our various patterns. And you can think of it sort of like a Rubik's Cube. that's exploring its various transformations. So we're evolving and growing via our different mathematical wave functions gaining in complexity. When we get to a sufficient level of complexity, when we get to a very high degree of complexity, we gain the capacity for self-awareness. We aren't automatically self-aware. We're originally just aware. We are aware, but we aren't aware that we are aware. That's what self-awareness is. That's the difference. You see a dog that barks at itself in the mirror. It's not really aware that it's aware. It just sees, oh, dog, bark. I'm hungry, eat. Being pet, wag tail. It doesn't see itself in the mirror and go, oh, that's me. See, this takes a level of abstraction because now you're thinking in the realm of abstract concepts. To be able to say, oh, that's me, requires abstraction. The concept of me, the concept of I. The I, the me, is a concept. Guess what happens then? Bam! Oh, you get an ego. The ego develops because the ego is the concept of I, is the concept of me. So you require this egoic development. Remember, ego is not a bad thing. Ego is a good thing. It's a bad thing if you use it wrong. It's a bad thing if you identify with it because the ego is not you. The ego is a simplified concept of you. It's not you. What you are is much bigger than the ego. But it's a tool that allows you to develop and use the concept of you or I or me. So it's saying that eventually we develop the ability for self-cognition or self-awareness, which we do. Human beings have this form of elevated consciousness, as does the absolute, but in case of the latter, it is a function of energy and it is associated quality of consciousness in infinity, omniscience and omnipotence in perpetual unity. When energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness in the pool of limitless, timeless perception that resides there. Thus, the more complex an energy system is in its material state, the more consciousness it possesses to maintain its reality. All right, important aspect here. Our consciousness, therefore, is that differentiated aspect of the universal consciousness which resides within the absolute. So, in other words, they're saying our subjectivity is a differentiated aspect of the universal mind. It is that it accounts for the organization of the energy patterns which constitute our physical body, but it is distinctly separate from and superior to it, since consciousness exists quite apart from and outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time-space. It, like the absolute, has neither beginning nor end. All right, so important things here. We as minds do not exist within the physical reality. We exist outside of the physical reality. And this is a concept that a lot of people have a hard time with. Because when you say, okay, first of all, we as minds don't exist within this realm. Our avatars do. And our avatars are what feeds our information to us that allows us to have the experience within this realm. This is all important for what we're going to be talking about with life after death. You remember, like I said, you need to know the foundational information to be able to have any kind of meaningful discussion about. If you don't know what life or death is, you got to, how can you talk about life after death and individuality? What does it mean to be an individual? So we as eternal minds, beings of frequencies, which are one, infinite, zero, that is eternal. That's what each one of us are. Each and every single one of us are one, infinite, zero, that is eternal. So we don't exist within the physical domain. We exist outside of it. So what does it mean to exist outside of it? It's not like we're all orbs of energy floating outside and looking down in the physical domain. It's not like that. It just means we are not within this domain. Think of it like this. A better way to understand it is like this. Think of a computer game versus the computer code. The computer code is not inside the game. So you could say the code is outside of the game. But you see, we're using outside not really in terms of location, because the code isn't literally located out. It's not like floating outside the game or anything like that. But conceptually speaking, the code is not in the game. The code is outside the game, but is what sustains the game. So you are not in space-time. It only seems like you're in space-time because your avatar is feeding you sensory information that gets interpreted by you that allows you to have the experience of being in space-time. It's an experience of being in space-time. You're not actually in space-time, what we call the holos. So easy way to understand it is kind of like putting on if you put on a VR headset, if you put on a virtual reality headset, it seems like you're in that VR world, but are you actually in the VR world? No. You're not actually in the VR world. It just seems like it. So you can imagine if someone were born with a VR headset permanently glued to their face, and they had, imagine extremely sophisticated VR technology that you could sense and feel and taste and touch everything. That person would think that they were in that realm. But they aren't actually. They aren't. So that's like we are outside of it. But we're not outside of it as though if we were to detach from our perception of having this physical experience, it's not like we're another body outside of it. No, of course not. We're an eternal mind, so we're in a different domain entirely. It's a domain of frequencies. It's a domain of patterns. If you've ever had a psychedelic experience and you've seen like realms of patterns, it looks like kaleidoscopic energy. That is an example of a possible experience of a frequency domain. So you don't exist within space-time. It's the perception of being within space-time because your avatars are what tune us to this domain. So there are many different domains that one can tune to. When you are awake and have a body and are interacting in this domain, you are tuned into the holos. When you go to sleep and dream, you're no longer tuned into the holos. You are tuned into your own personal mind, and you're experiencing your own frequency patterns projected into the dream world that you're experiencing. So human beings generally tune to either the holos or their own personal dream world. Okay, so having ascertained that human consciousness is able to separate from physical reality and interact with other intelligences and other dimensions within the universe, and that it is both eternal and destined for ultimate return to the absolute, we are faced with the question, so what happens then? Okay. Important. This is where we're going to be talking about life after death, and are you still you? Do you retain your individuality? Since memory is a function of consciousness and therefore enjoys the same eternal character as the consciousness which accounts for its experience, it must be admitted that when consciousness returns to the absolute, it brings with it all the memories it has accumulated through experience and reality. The return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity with the consciousness organized and sustained in reality. Rather, it suggests a differentiated consciousness which merges with that and participates in the universal consciousness and infinity of the absolute without losing the separate identity and accumulated self-knowledge which its memories confer upon it. So essentially what it is saying is that when one disconnects from the body and merges with the absolute, so in our terms, we could say merges with the source, okay? It's just saying when one is merging with the absolute, the question is, does it retain its individuality? And the answer here is yes, and the answer to that question is why. The answer that this gives is memories. And that memories forms an individual structure within us that uniquely identifies us. So if we don't even want to think in terms of memories, because memories is a very simplistic human concept, we can just think in terms of energy patterns. Because our memories, what are our memories? They're just energy patterns. They're just patterns arranged in a certain way. Because we're beings of frequencies, so we're continuously arranging our internal frequency structure. You can imagine it sort of like a Rubik's Cube, and our memories will allow us to retain a unique structure, in that not just our memories, of course, but memories serve a very important part of it. So our memories and just our energetic structure in general allows us our unique individuality. So you can imagine many different Rubik's Cubes, but they all have a different pattern. And these different patterns are what separate them, what makes them unique. And each and every one of us has a unique energy structure. Each and every one of us has a unique energy pattern. And because each and every one of us has a unique energy pattern, this differentiates us from each other. And thus we retain our individuality. And I'm going to go more into this and explain why. This is just kind of surface level at the moment, but I want to read the rest here real quick but we have to come back to that. There's more to unpack there, and it's important. But there's just one more paragraph I want to read, and then I want to jump into it in detail. So the return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity. I read that already. It retains its accumulated self-knowledge, which its memories confer upon it. All right, and this is also why it's important. Our life is about learning, growing, knowing, and understanding. And we retain this knowledge throughout lifetimes. Even if we don't consciously recall it or consciously remember it, it remains embedded within us as our unique energy structure, as our unique energy signature that aids in our evolution and growth. You can imagine as a Rubik's Cube that is getting closer and closer to completion. It's getting closer and closer to solving itself, you could say. So, in other words, it retains the power to perceive, but loses the power of will or choice. In exchange, however, this consciousness participates in the all-knowing infinite continuum of consciousness, which is a characteristic of energy in the ever-present. Consequently, it is accurate to observe that when a person experiences the out-of-body state, he is, in fact, projecting that eternal spark of consciousness and memory, which constitutes the ultimate source of his identity, to let it play in and learn from dimensions both inside and outside the time-space world in which his physical component currently enjoys a short period of reality. Real quick, let me talk about this. So what they're talking about here, they're not necessarily talking about life after death. Okay, so let me make that clear. I'm just using this as sort of a springboard to talk about life after death because it has a lot of similarities. What they're specifically talking about is a consciousness that merges with the source. They're saying absolute. What they call absolute, we call the source. The absolute, we refer to something different. So they're talking about a consciousness or a mind that merges with the source. And they're basically saying a consciousness or mind that merges with the source does not lose its unique individuality. It retains it because of its unique energy signature, that is its memory construct. But what does it mean by it loses free will and it's not able to interact? So it says, what it does lose is the capability for generation of independent thought holograms, since that can only be done by energy in motion. In other words, it retains the power to perceive, but loses the power of will or choice. Okay, so what does this mean exactly? So what does it mean to if anyone has had the experience, and I've had this experience, of the pure white light, okay? So if people have experienced this in near-death experiences, in meditative states, in psychedelic states, it's just a pure white light, which is the base reality. Now this is the source, and in that source domain there is nothing. It is just a pure white light because it's a pure stillness. You're reaching the Fourier basis waves where they have not combined yet to form any complicated structures. It's just very base reality. So since it's the very base reality, it's just a pure blank slate. And so you're just experiencing that one unique, unified, pure, blank slate. And there's nothing to do there. It's beautiful, and you have this sense of all-knowing and a sense of omniscience and omnipotence in a certain way. It's very hard to describe unless you experience. But you can't really do anything there because doing something would result in a different domain. Because now when you do something, well, you're having waves interact and you're forming a different structure. This is the base reality, the very bare building blocks before anything is built. But you retain your individuality. You retain your unique individuality because you're coming into it as a unique energy signature. You're a unique energy signature that is tapping in to the base reality where everything is undifferentiated. So you yourself are a differentiated being because of its unique energy signature that's tapping into an undifferentiated unity where you can't necessarily do anything there, but you can, but you are a unique, independent entity. And so that's what they're talking about in terms of connecting to the source, okay? Merging with the source. But we want to talk about life after death. Life after death is a little different. Okay? So let's spend some time talking about life after death. This is the important part. So what happens when you die? Well, you, as an eternal mind, are eternal, but your body dies, okay? But this is why it's very important to take care of yourself. Be careful. Make sure you have a healthy body. We're all about taking care of yourself, being healthy, etc. You want to maintain your avatar and have a long, healthy life. But when your avatar eventually does pass away, you as a mind are no longer associated with that body. So you as a frequency function are no longer interacting or interfacing with this space-time function of the body that allows you to interact directly with the space-time world. But you as an eternal mind retain this unique energy structure, this unique energy signature, because you are a unique pattern that is different from every other mind's pattern in existence. So every single one of us is a mind that has a completely unique energy signature. And this energy signature is constantly transforming and changing, but we ourselves are eternal. But this pattern that is changing is constantly changing into something and transforming into something that is unique. And this is what individuates us. This is what makes us unique. And we are having this experience, and when we disconnect from our bodies, we are still individual, independent, unique minds. So, being that, when we have life after death, we enter into what we call the death current, which is a process. And this death current is when we tune into, as minds, different domains other than, we're no longer tuning into the space-time domain, because our bodies is what was tuning us into the space-time domain. We've now taken off the VR headset and we're tuning into different domains. We don't have bodies anymore unless we tune into some kind of domain where you have a body, just like you have a body when you tune into your own dream world. You have a dream body. Okay, so you can have dreamlike bodies. So in the death current, you are tuned into possibly many different domains. You could be tuned into your own internal domain, which is your dream realm. You could be tuned into the source domain, which we talked about, which is the pure undifferentiated white light. You could be tuned into various different domains. But eventually, the reason why we call it the death current is because unless it's an extremely evolved mind, this is an unconscious process. You don't know, it's very unlikely. It's very likely that you don't know that you are dead. It's very unlikely that you do know that you're dead. You probably don't know. Just like when you're dreaming, you don't know that you're dreaming. You're just going along with it. You're going with the flow of the dream. You're not really questioning it. You're going with the flow. This is why we call it the death current. It's mostly an unconscious process. And eventually, it will end up in your relocalization into another avatar. That is reincarnation. But before we go further, I want to talk about the process of individuality real quick. And I always love to use this symbol of the flower of life because I think that it is just a very powerful symbol to represent uniqueness and identity. So if you notice, this flower of life, this symbol, is made up of nothing but circles. That's it. It's just a bunch of circles. All right? So this symbol, just a bunch of circles. Imagine that each circle represents a single eternal mind. So that every single circle is one infinite zero that is eternal. Every single one of these circles, okay? So what makes these circles unique? And we're going kind of, this is a metaphor. This is an allegory here, okay? So what makes these circles unique? What makes these circles unique is, in this case, their location. You can tell one circle apart from another circle because it has a different location. If these circles did not have a unique location, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. If all the circles had the same location, let's say at the center, at the origin, it would look like a single circle because there would be no unique identifier to tell one circle apart from another. Now, when different things all share the same property, they are functionally identical. And this is known as Leibniz's law. And Leibniz's law basically says when multiple things are identical, they are actually one thing. Now, it's important to understand when we say that they are one thing, it means they are functionally one thing. So another way to think about this, so remember, we're using an allegory, and we're saying that location is the unique identifier for each of these, let's say, minds. But if they did not have a unique identifier, it would be as though they were one mind. Now, are they actually one mind? No, they are functionally one mind with the potentiality for multiplicity, and that's what's very important, is because they have the potentiality to differentiate. If there was actually one mind and nothing else, there would be no capacity for differentiation. It's because they have a potentiality. This is why you are eternal. Even when we are in identity, we are eternal. So, this is what's important. At the very beginning of reality, before the Big Bang, there's nothing that differentiates us, meaning that we are functionally one and identical, but we are still eternal individual minds, but we are in the state of identity. So we are functionally one, even though it is not in a state where we still have the potentiality for differentiation. So one way to think about this, again, if you have Photoshop, imagine that you put a bunch of circles everywhere on, say you put 100 circles out on Photoshop, and you show your friend. Your friend comes in, you go, hey, how many circles are there? Oh, they go, well, there's 100 circles there. I mean, they'd have to count, but they'd go, yeah, there's 100 circles there. Okay, now imagine your friend leaves the room. Now you take away the thing that makes those circles unique. What makes those circles unique? Their location. Well, you put them all at the center, right? Remember on Photoshop, you can sort of lay one circle on top of each other. So you have all these circles laying on top of each other. Well, it looks like there's just one circle. You ask your friend to come in. Hey, come on in. How many circles are there? They go, oh, well, now there's one circle. You go, okay, thank you. And they leave the room. For them, there's just one circle because there's nothing to differentiate them. But by introducing difference, that is giving each circle a unique location, you can then introduce difference and have a multiplicity of circles. So do you see the difference between having, let's say in Photoshop, 100 circles all laying over each other? Okay, imagine you have two Photoshop projects open. There's one Photoshop project and another Photoshop project. One Photoshop project, there's 100 circles all laying on top of each other, but it looks like one circle. And then on the other Photoshop project, there is just a single circle. You have your friend come in. To them, it looks like the same project. This one has one circle and this one has one circle. Oh, it's the same thing, same project. One circle there, one circle here. But you know that this one with 100 circles laying on top of each other has the capacity, by introducing difference, to be differentiated. Whereas the one that doesn't have 100 circles, it's just one there, does not have the capacity to be differentiated. So you see, this is how reality works, in that you are that reality has this functionality of being an identity or multiplicity, in that we are all unique, eternal minds, but have the capacity to enter into identity. But even when we enter into identity, we are still eternally individual, but we are functionally operating as one. We are functionally one mind at that point. So why am I saying all this? Because we're talking about individuality. When we die, we retain our individuality because we have a unique signature. That unique signature is the way that our particular frequency patterns are arranged. And a big factor of that is memory. A big factor of what makes us unique and differentiated, a big factor of that is memory, as it serves a unique energetic structure. Now, so this is why we are eternally individual and eternally unique. Now, fast forward to the very, 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 very end of time. The very end of time, we can become more synchronized, and we do a memory wipe. At that point, we enter into identity, but we are still eternal and individual ones. We just all reflect the same properties at that point, and thus by Leibniz's law are functionally one, but have the capacity for multiplicity and diversity within that system. So that's important. And I know some people get confused by this. They're thinking more about like the Photoshop with only one circle. No, it's the Photoshop with 100 circles overlaid that has the capacity to be one and many. So reality, we are this one mind that exercises its capacity to be a multiplicity. And we are now, what we're doing is we are that one mind that is experiencing ourselves in diversity. So reality, we are one but many at the same time. Now, there's a second way to understand this, and I just want to say this real quick, okay, because this is also important. Look at the circle of the symbol of life, okay? The symbol of life, the flower of life, this is such a great example as well, because even when we're in multiplicity, which is the majority of the time, we're only in identity for a moment. And the majority of the time, we're in multiplicity. When we're in multiplicity, though, we are still we're still a unity. We're still a single mind in another sense. Because look at the flower of life. Even though the flower of life is a multiplicity of circles, it itself is a single pattern. The flower of life is a pattern itself, but it's formed by the multiplicity of patterns within it. It is formed by the circles within it. So it is nothing other than that, okay? So this is what we refer to as the mind of the absolute. And it's what we are. So we are all unique, individual, eternal minds, as unique, like being unique circles here, but we also take part in the absolute consciousness, which is the eternal structure here. We are all nodes within the absolute, but that is what we are. Because remember, in the beginning, we were all an identity. And in identity, I, we, you, me, because at that point, it's all functionally the same. Functionally. That's a very important word, very important caveat. We decide to explore ourselves in our diversity. And so since we explore ourselves in our diversity, we have introduced uniqueness, which is introducing difference, which then we are all now unique perspectives. Instead of having that singular perspective, we all now have unique perspectives. Now, this is why it's so important that the world understands this. Because when the world understands this, we'll understand that we're all reflections of each other. We're all one and many at the same time. We are all one mind, experiencing our unique perspectives in diversity. So when people ask like, oh, are we one mind or are we many minds? It's both. Reality logically and rationally has the ability to be both at the same time. It's not a contradiction. It is a logical and rational possibility that actualizes itself. So we are one and many in several different ways. We're individual minds, but we are one pattern, and we are also an identity that is exploring its functionality of being a multiplicity through introducing difference. So what happens when you die? When you die, you don't become absorbed into some cosmic oneness. You don't lose your individuality. Your individuality is nothing that you lose. Even at the very end of time is just your individuality becomes equivalent to others' individualities. So we have a singular perspective, but that's only at the very end of time. But still, your individuality is not lost per se, in that it is ontologically destroyed, but rather we just have a singular perspective because we have entered into a state of identity. So when we die, when our bodies die, we retain our unique individuality. And the reason why we contain our unique individuality is because we have a unique energy signature, a lot of it dealing with memory, that differentiates us from all other minds in existence. And when I say memory, it doesn't matter if like it's, some people might think, oh man, I have a terrible memory. It has nothing to do with that. I just mean that you have recorded throughout your experiences all this information within your unconscious. So not just memory. It depends what you want to define memory and call memory, right? We could talk about semantics about what you define and call memory, but all your energetic structures, your experiences, all the information that you have gathered that is stored within you as a unique wave structure and wave pattern within you makes you unique. And this unique structure persists and is what differentiates you. And even when we're an identity, our individuality is not destroyed. We simply have a singular perspective and then differentiate. So when you die, you retain your individuality. But remember, we're not just individuals. We're also one system. We're one system where we are the flower of life that's exploring itself in its multiplicity. So we're all one and many at the same time. So one thing that I want to really point out here, do you see how when I am explaining, let's say, that we retain our individualities, I want you to notice that we're talking about metaphysics, but we're doing so where we're examining our intuitions rationally. This is very important in metarationalism. Metarationalism says that we can understand metaphysics rationally, that we can parse our intuitions with reason to come to a better understanding of reality. You notice if you go to, like a New Age group or something and you ask them about life after death or whatever, they'll just tell you an answer like, oh yes, we're absorbed into the cosmic oneness after we talk to Metatron, or oh no, we retain our individuality and then incarnate into 5D consciousness or something. But you'll notice that they're not giving you any reasons as to why that is the case. They're just making a statement based on their intuitions. They're just making a statement. And then either you go like, oh yeah, that feels right, or oh, that feels true. I want you to notice the difference here. And that with metarationalism, we are giving you reasons as to why it is the case rather than another. This is why it is this way. Why are we eternal? Because we are one, infinite zeros, and being that we are the concept of zero and nothingness, we logically must exist. Why do we retain our individuality? Because we are systems of energetic energy that have a unique energetic structure that differentiate us. So that's really important, because we don't want to be stuck in dogma. You know me, I grew up religious trauma syndrome, strict Christian household. You know the story. We want to be lucid. We want to be clear. We don't want to just be indoctrinated into another bullshit religion, even if it calls itself spirituality or whatever. We want to make sure that we have that we have reasons, that all of our beliefs are grounded in reason, and we understand that we can that we can know these things in a rational way. But we have to be very critical of that as well. We also have to be critical of the fact that we can err in our reason. So we always have to remember that as well. So we have to take all these things into account, because we want to understand the metaphysical domain with more rigor and better than science understands the physical domain. We want this to be an exact science. And so we have to do so rationally, and also be self-aware enough to realize that it is possible to make mistakes and leave room for that possibility as well. So I hope this has helped, and most importantly, you begin to understand what makes what we talk about different from a lot of, like New Age and spiritual systems out there. We want to have a blend of intuition and reason that is self-reflective, self-critical, and has extreme rigor in its process. I have so many more videos that you would love. Check them out on my channel, and thank you so much. Remember, if you enjoy my work, consider supporting on Patreon. It helps out a lot. You get access to weekly members-only videos, our whole archive. There's a lot of videos. You can check them out by becoming a member on Patreon or Tier 2 or higher on YouTube. The join button is right below this video. And I also want to remind you guys, hey, don't feel pressured to support monetarily. You don't have to. I don't ever want anyone to, it helps, but I don't want anyone to feel pressured or feel like they have to. There's plenty of free ways you can support, like liking, subscribing, and sharing. That being said, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who does support. I really appreciate it. Especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, Maria, Joel, Fairies of Venus, Fashida, DB, and everyone else. Thank you very much.